Hello and welcome. It's time for One on One. My name is Titilayo Oyinsan. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure being live with you online. Would appreciate it if you subscribe to this channel. If you're watching live on YouTube, you are welcome. Please subscribe. Make sure you hit that notification bell, and of course, send the link to a friend or family member who might really need this information today. Of course, we're also live on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcast. We're also live on Instagram, LinkedIn, X, and Facebook, and we appreciate each and every one of you. Okay, the comment section is going to go live as well. We'll be able to see your comments, take your questions, and hopefully answer the questions you have while we're having this conversation. Speaking of conversations, today's topic is an interesting one: sustainability in action. We're talking about building systems for a cleaner planet. Now, as the world is grappling with the effects of climate change, pollution, resource depletion, the need for sustainable solutions has never been more urgent. But what does it really take to create systems that not only protect our environment, but also promote long term sustainability for future generations? That's the question we are hoping to answer today on One on One. And helping us take this deep dive, we have Bridgett Majola. And now she is a banking and finance lawyer and head of project finance, energy, and infrastructure in Johannesburg. She's chairperson of the Future Leaders Network under the auspices of the International Project Finance Association and the chair of the IPFA, South African Council. She's focused her practice on various forms of debt finance, including project finance and leveraging loan facilities. She's also got experience in drafting facility agreements, security documents, and other stuff like that. So she is the person really that we can help, that can help us have a little bit of a clearer picture of what it will actually take to have a more sustainable future, especially with regards building systems in this day and age. It is 2024 and there's a lot happening right now. But let's say hello to Bridgett. Hi, Bridgett.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
All right, then. Now I would love for us to just get an overview of why you got so interested in this line of work. It from your profile, it does say that you are, of course, a banking and finance lawyer, and that doesn't really lean onto the cleaner planet, looking forward to the future, side of things. When you think about it, it has to be something from more a place of passion, in my opinion. But let me let you tell us exactly how you got involved in all this.
Thanks. I think that it's a combination of both because obviously I think personally that I'm passionate about the overall outcome, which is making sure that we are in a sustainable environment or an environment where my kids can thrive and have a happy and successful life. Like, for example, I would want them to be in a world that feels like Kigali, where there's no pollution, or a world that is safe, or a world where infrastructure is functioning, like in a first world country, like some of the European countries, or the Western European worlds, or even Asia, for example. So I think the role that I play in the financing space is to ensure that transactions where there is someone that says, hey, I've got a good idea about how we can achieve this goal that I'm passionate about, i.e., a world that is sustainable, where there's no pollution or where there is electricity for everybody. You saw me trying to put on my light earlier, where I'm so prepared because of load shedding. And then they say that they don't have financing to make that happen. And I would then be able to either connect them with people that have financing or help to assist to make those transactions come together.
Okay. All right. So from your point of view, let's sort of give a definition to what sustainability actually means in the context of your work. Um, and then, of course, how does the organization you work for, how does it, of course, contribute to this issue of having a cleaner planet?
So I think sustainability for me means being reliant on sources that are varied. So not just coal or not just renewables or not just nuclear. Sources that are varied in order to provide some kind of balance to the electricity supply system, making sure that businesses are also contributing to that sustainability, and also that we as individuals are also contributing and playing a role. And also it goes to waste management, waste treatment. It's the whole life cycle, making sure that if someone has a good idea about transportation, sustainable agriculture, a policy idea, a governance idea, a climate change adaptation, like what do we need to change in order to achieve this ultimate goal, that they're all having the same conversation, or at least that there's a platform where they can be connected to be able to have the same conversation and
Hmm.
provide solutions to each other.
Okay, but it does feel like there's a lot of people feel sort of disconnected to the major issues. There are a lot of challenges out there, and it does feel like everyone is in their own bubble. People just tend to want to mind their own business and focus on what affects just them. But there are some significant environmental challenges presently that we are facing today that are not so obvious to people. What are the things we should be focusing on right now? What are the things that, if we don't look at them right now critically, are going to affect us, let's say, 2 to 5 years down the line?
Okay, so let me just start about the things that I think we should be focusing on. I
Yeah.
think we should be individually focusing on what you and I think we're contributing to the problem and what we think we can change. So, for example, do you separate your rubbish when you put it out, or do you just put everything in the same basket and hope that someone else sorts it? I don't know. What do you do? Because I think generally I try to separate it, but it doesn't always happen.
I actually
So
have been separating mine, but specifically just plastics. Plastics. I've
yeah.
not been separating paper. I've not been separating paper or aluminium cans, but I have been separating a lot of the plastics. But that's just one thing, right? Is that enough?
Well, I mean, I think every step is a positive step in a positive direction. There's also education and awareness. So if you're doing it, are you talking to me about the fact that I need to be doing it? Because all those little small steps that you and I can do are all contributing towards reducing the carbon footprint. And if you are basically advocating, like on your platform, which is a huge platform on the continent, are you talking about people prioritizing the idea of reusing and recycling, um, and also supporting other people that have platforms, community engagement platforms, whether they're educational, that support sustainable practices, and businesses as well. Some businesses are providing sustainable products. Some of them are trying to incorporate sustainability into their supply chain, repackaging. Are we saying yay, or are we still saying we want our beautiful plastic boxes with the embossed emblem of a fancy brand,
Hmm,
that we'd prefer to receive our packaging of our items in?
sure. Sure. So right now it boils down to everyone. So for instance, maybe your company is having some kind of event or expecting some visitors, and you want to package food for them for lunch or something like that. Are you using recyclable containers for it, or are you going with the packaging that's is not recyclable? I don't know. I'm wondering about that because it is those little things. Not too many months ago, I'm not sure if it was 2 or 3 months ago, we had a ban on styrofoam, for instance, here in Nigeria. And I know I have a feeling it's been banned in SA for quite a while now. But little things like that have affected the environment and filled up less drainages, etc., etc. But how do we begin to approach this issue of integration, um, integrating all of these existing systems in industries that traditionally have been less environmentally friendly?
So, when it comes to integration, I think that I guess advocacy must play an important role in that because I think countries basically are like you and I. They are very influenceable by positive or negative actions by one country. So, for example, in South Africa, because of the crises that we've been experiencing with energy, we've passed legislation that allows people who are finding solutions for their individual households for alternative energy supplies to be able to get a tax write off, for example. And then it extends to small businesses to also give them some kind of relief. If I'm doing it, then my next door neighbor, Namibia, Swaziland, Lesotho, Botswana, might also think, oh, actually, we rely a little bit on South Africa's energy supply. We might also apply the same reductions because it's a positive thing. It puts money back in the hands of the end consumer, which is the citizen that is already the one that's contributing to the fiscus.
Hmm. So I'm thinking now a little bit about um, okay, so if we move away from integration, what about innovation? Different bright ideas. There do seem to be a lot of bright ideas put out there, but maybe not as much support as we wish they were getting for many different reasons. But let's talk about the role that innovation plays in this effort towards sustainability.
Yeah, I think that, of course, there is the research and development phase of every innovative solution that's eventually provided. But I do think that you're right that sometimes when it is at conceptual stage, it's very difficult for someone that has money to say, oh, actually, I think that this might work without that idea having been market sounded and having other people saying, oh, actually, I think it's a good idea. Because, like you, actually, as you say, I also know of a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs that come up with really great ideas. And until they have, number one, a proven concept, or as we say in my world, a bankable concept, it's very difficult to fund.
Hmm. Funding. We've already come towards the money side of things now, haven't we? Funding for these efforts. In your opinion, is it more expensive to run a business that sort of has sustainability at the core of its operations, its everyday operations? Doesn't it feel a bit more expensive to consider sustainability in 2024?
Well, actually, that's an interesting one because I think I can understand why you and I would think that, because you and I, as the actual consumer, sometimes we see something that is sustainable. If you buy something sustainable or like organic food at a restaurant, normally it costs a little bit more than what you'd pay for, I don't know, I don't want to use other brands, but like um, than something that you could buy at a fast food chain, for example. So I
True.
can see how conceptually that might be the case. In the R&D space, or at least in the sustainability space, what I find to be the case is that actually the cost isn't necessarily from a manufacturing perspective. It's mainly because in country, like in South Africa or maybe in Nigeria, I don't know the Nigerian market well enough to be authoritative on it, but for example, like us, we don't necessarily have technical expertise to, for example, manufacture solar panels or mini grids or integrated alternative solutions. We have to import a lot of that. Either it's if it's skills from Europe, or if it's the actual component or the item from China or from the East or somewhere else. And so, because our regulatory regime hasn't accommodated importation to be cheaper, of course, there's going to be a cost that's going to be added, and that's going to be
Sure.
the import cost.
Sure.
So I do think you're right that it is a little bit more expensive, but that's the reason,
Mm.
likely reason. I don't want to say it's the reason, it's the
So,
likely reason.
so in the end, we have to measure, sort of have to balance it. If you are in, management, of course, or core operations, you have to sort of balance costs and then, of course, be able to measure or give parameters to the amount of success. So let's talk about how we can measure the success or impact of certain initiatives. Let's say sustainability initiatives that you probably implement, um, based on your, this is just based on your opinion, really. How do we measure if it's working and not fall back on old ways, so to speak?
Well, actually, I just wanted to quickly go back to the previous point that we were talking about and just say that Um, I was in Nairobi last year and we had a similar discussion to what you and I are discussing now. And there was a lady that was eloquently advocating for the need in Africa in particular to basically support locals creating businesses that are able to supply or support local manufacturing of panels, for example, or provide services like electricity aggregation or local infrastructure in order to decrease the amount of importation that we actually do. And I thought that that was really such a great idea, because if we invest in our local economies to try and support those skills, then there's a decreased need to import a whole bunch of the skill set and or the items that need to be obtained. Of course, technologically, maybe some items do need to be imported, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the case exclusively for the long
Sure.
run. Yeah.
Sure. So, making sure that we do what we can to engage local manufacturers, young innovators in this space who have bright ideas. There are quite a few of them I've been able to interview on one-on-one myself, and it's still all balls uh, rolls back onto to funding at some point, getting people to sponsor them, scaling up on what they do. But can I come back to the issue of measurement? Measuring the impact of,
Success.
yes, or success and impact of these initiatives. How have you been able to do that?
Well, it depends on the kind of project that you are doing. So, for example, if you are doing a project where you're going to be building a plant in a particular community, then what you would say is you'd say, well, as a funder, what I want to see is I want to see that environmentally I'm getting these kind of reports to make sure that the environment isn't adversely impacted. Secondly, I want to see that the community is getting this many jobs, and of the many jobs that are being allocated to the community, that a certain amount is being allocated to the youth, a certain amount is being allocated to women, and a certain amount is being allocated to enterprise and innovation, which is what you were talking about. So you make sure you are lifting others as you are building, and that you're making sure that the impact is only really measured in numbers. And so you want to be able to create a question mark, like the one that you're asking me, how are you measuring? You want to measure environmentally. What am I doing environmentally? What am I saving? Socially, how many jobs am I creating? How am I contributing to that community? And in terms of governance, am I creating jobs, or what matrices do I have in place to measure that
Sure.
actually governance and reporting is actually happening to a level that I'm satisfied with?
Mm, mm. So I guess, as you did say, it does depend on which uh, industry you're actually focusing on right now, and what exactly you're doing. But I guess when it comes to those metrics, you know, it does feel like if we keep looking at numbers, we'll be seeing a very slow incline. We're not going to be seeing things move very fast. And it does feel like management, top brass, always want to see things getting better, quicker, which often leads to some false starts, a lot of pauses, and possibly going back on old ways because it just doesn't feel like it's working. But let's see what you think about the trends in this particular field of sustainability. How do you think these trends are doing right now? And then, of course, where do you see this going? What is what is sustainability going to be doing to shape our future? Talk to us.
Okay, so in terms of trends, I'm seeing a lot of countries making legislative changes, because I think on the continent, number one, we've been plagued with a lot of perception from the East and the West, which is where a predominant amount of our funding is coming from, saying, oh, if I want to invest in Nigeria, there's a policy and regulatory restrictions. South Africa, things are slow, and you've got all these complications. But I've really been seeing the local economies saying, you know what, actually, we want to stand up and meet our potential investors halfway and make sure that we are making ourselves as attractive as possible as an investment destination, whether it's making sure that we are addressing foreign currency restrictions from exiting, whether we are changing amendments to our legislation to allow more players to be participants in predominantly previously exclusive supply and offtake arrangements. For example, in South Africa, we've always had one entity being the supplier, generator, distributor, off-taker, whereas now we've got an act that allows for multiple participants to be active in our electricity supply. We've got carbon tax legislation that allows for companies to be able to offset that. And then you've also got a huge push on the ESG side,
Hmm.
which I think is quite positive in general.
I'm thinking about
I'm
what
thinking
sort of
about what
impacts your
your
institution, where you work presently, that you've been working on, or projects
projects
in the past,
in the
and how
past
they went.
and how they went.
What do you think
Do you think?
made them either successful or maybe not as successful as you would have hoped?
Um, okay, so I think what makes them successful is having good advisors that push quite a bit. What makes things very unsuccessful is an expectation that the government needs to do something, or the government needs to provide some kind of support or give some kind of nod to something. I don't think that we're there anymore. I think economies in Africa are saying, we need to find solutions outside of government. And I'm seeing a lot of that at the moment, where there's, of course, there's the programs that are run by government and people want to participate and be supportive, but there's a huge successful push for projects that are outside of government, even platforms that are supposed to support and accelerate infrastructure development all over the continent, like we were talking about initially, where I know you have a passion, or it sounds to me like you definitely have a passion for supporting young innovators, and making sure that their ideas are not only supported, but that they're funded, so that they have the ability to conceptualize, innovate, make mistakes, and create even better business ideas. So I'm seeing a lot of that type of thinking. And sorry, I know I'm speaking for a little bit too long, but
No, no, no,
also,
go ahead, please. Please go ahead.
I do think that what is a bigger trend that I'm also seeing is that there's a whole bunch of new emerging market funds that are saying not only are we going to take donor funding, but we're going to take funding also from multilaterals, we're going to take funding from private investors, and we're going to take funding from institutional investors, and we're going to invest that money into projects that we think are successful. Some of them are going to have a financial return, which is for bigger projects like we're talking about. But some of the projects, like we spoke about earlier, like the ones that you're passionate about, might not necessarily immediately have an economic return, because obviously it's building, but it will have a
Yeah.
social economic return immediately, and maybe in the future it will have an economic return. And so
I-
people are
I'm,
thinking about stuff like that.
I'm thinking there are a lot of misconceptions about what sustainability really truly means, which is why maybe people just try and shy away from it. On the agenda in most minutes of most meetings, it's probably right there at the bottom. It's not right at the top. Um, but we're trying to shift it towards the top of the agenda little by little, but it just doesn't seem to be getting there, and it's probably because there are a few misconceptions. Do you have any you could share with us that have popped up once in a while?
Well, I think people think that sustainability is about losing money, like you and I were talking about earlier. We think you're going to have to pay more because if you want to support something sustainable, it's going to cost you a little bit more. It's going to be a little bit more expensive. But it is also possible to think about it as a longer term saving, because there's going to be resources there in the future for you to be able to use. I think also people think that it has something to do with being a hippie, or something like that. But all that it has to do with is really preserving the resources that we have in order to last us a little bit longer than
Mm,
what they are projected to last for. And also making sure that we're being smarter about the
mm,
way that we are using those resources,
mm,
and providing an environment that's like a little bit more resilient to changes that we can't do anything about. Like, for example, climate change. Obviously, it has an impact, especially we're feeling it at the moment at home. There's a water issue, there's a huge water supply issue, there's a water treatment issue. So now, obviously, that tells us that water shortage of water is going to be a huge issue in the future. So what do we do now to try and ensure that we minimize that impact? Because we can definitely see that it's going to happen, you
mm.
know?
Of course, there's still quite a few questions I want to ask, but we are pushing it on time now. But I have to say thank you so much for joining us today on One on One. I really appreciate your perspective on this. And the conversation, of course, continues our comment section and on every platform that you are either listening or watching us from. Please use it, ask the questions, and we'll see what we can do to answer these questions after this episode wraps up. But give me some final thoughts on this issue of sustainability in action.
Well, I think that sustainability in action is it's not about supporting the big headline items like energy transition, like renewable energy, all these topics that you were referring to earlier about, there are conceptual things that are difficult for us to relate to, or they're the bottom of a business agenda, but to just think about it as what can I do as a person to minimize the impact? Am I turning off my tap? Am I using my water wisely? Am I using my electricity wisely? Am I turning off the lights in rooms where I'm not in? Am I supporting suppliers, that are providing services that are a little bit sustainable? And maybe I can't do all three at once, but maybe I can start in my own home, like you and I were talking about a little bit earlier.
Hmm.
Can I just separate the trash so that the fiscus isn't spending R5 or $5 on hiring a resource to do the sorting, for example?
Hmm.
Because it all adds up.
It does. It does indeed. Thank you so much for talking to us today on One on One. Let me let you go now. I know you have a few more meetings to attend to. Bridgett Majola, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
All right, bye. Okay, so yeah, so our topic today is one that we are trying to tackle little by little. Why? Because we are all grappling with the effects of climate change, pollution, resource depletion, and it's happening all over the world. It's not just here in Nigeria. Um, there is a need for some sustainable solutions, and it's just the little things: turning off your tap, not keeping it running while you're brushing your teeth, for instance. Just little things like that. Changing the way your staff use their equipment, putting some things in place. Just if you are the manager or head of a company, for instance, and you're watching or listening to this, just take those, maybe have a particular meeting and brainstorm on how you can help your company become a little bit more sustainable. That was the whole goal of this conversation. And we had Bridgett Majola join us today to talk about this. She is in banking and finance. She is the head of project finance and energy and infrastructure company in Johannesburg. She's a chairperson of Future Leaders Network, and that's under the auspices of the International Project Finance Association and chair of the IPFA South Africa Council. Now, she's been focusing her practice on various forms of debt finance, including project financing. And a lot of the projects that she's probably been approached for have that sustainability factor as well. So hopefully we're giving you something to think about. There's still quite a lot more we're going to be discussing on one-on-one soon enough. We would love it if you could join us. If you would like to be on one-on-one sometime soon, all you have to do is send us an email. That's dynamitepodcastnetwork@gmail.com. dynamitepodcastnetwork@gmail.com. All right, then, until next time, my name is Titilayo Oyinsan. Thank you so much for listening.